I just want to thank everybody for allowing me to speak here at the Listen Up Festival. So my name is Krris Krimitsos, and I am coming from Tampa, Florida. Right now, it is 5 in the morning. The sun has yet to wake up in this part of the world. So it's a real pleasure and honor to be part of this. And I've been asked to share kind of the growth of podcasting in the U.S. market and kind of some insights. I run an event called PodFest, and it's become quite a large event. But I think the growth of the event of PodFest will give you an entree in the growth of podcasting, and I'll relate the two together. Monday, August 5th, 2013, we held a meetup with 13 individuals for the reason of learning podcasting, just like everybody's doing here. And at the time, in the U.S., the two biggest fields that grew first for podcasting was comedy podcasts and business podcasts. And I learned by watching and exploring the business market. And what we did next was I held 2 workshops in my local area here in the state of Florida. And in those 2 workshops, we helped people get started. And what we realized early on, and by the way, just if you guys hear background noise, it's so early, my office building is not open. So I'm right outside the office building in the beautiful atrium here. So we planted seeds for podcasting. And what happened was, and I'm hoping that this also happens in other parts of the world like Russia, is a lot of our individuals that attended those early workshops, like this workshop, started creating podcasts in very different topics. And they started grabbing market share and audience when most people were asleep to the opportunity of podcasting. And this happened 2014, 2015, 2016, over the next few years. This was in 2015. This gentleman was one of the first ever podcasts to talk about sales. And I want to relate to you what it's like, what it was like in the early years, because I think in Russia and other countries, you're going through a similar growth pattern. In the early years, the trouble we had was people didn't understand what the word podcasting meant. They understood radio, they understood television. They actually understood YouTube in the early years because YouTube had already taken off, but with audio, with podcasting, they didn't understand what we were doing. And I'm going to put this in the chat. Let me see if I could put this here. We actually made, I was going to put a link. We actually made a documentary film about podcasting. It's called The Messengers, a podcast documentary. It's up on YouTube. If you'd like to watch it, it's free of charge. But the reason why we made the film is we got tired of telling people what podcasting was, and they just didn't understand. So we had to make a visual documentation for them to really understand, what is podcasting? What is this thing? How does it work? And in the early years, we spent a lot of time explaining what podcasting is. Actually, many of the early podcasters in those years didn't even call their podcast a podcast. They would call it a radio show. And the reason why they called it radio is people understood the term, and then they would just say, go on the internet, type this in, and you'll find it. And people didn't ask them, oh, what is this thing called a podcast? One of our earliest stories is Randy Goers, the man standing there in the front of the room. He came to us kind of wondering, what should he do? He actually is a city planner. So he, for a living, is the city planner for the city of Tampa that I am in right now. And he started a podcast talking about drones. So his show is called The Drone Radio Show. He is now one of the top 5 global leaders in the world that talks about drones. All the top experts will go on his show and talk about drones. So it was interesting to see early on how a simple concept applied in the right marketplace with the right growth trajectory, how over time people could become massively successful. The reason why I'm very proud of this picture is Randy had a lot of issues, talking in front of people. And here he is teaching 2-3 years later about podcasting at the very conference he started at the front row. The common problems I will tell you most of us face in the early days is because the market was small the listening market, that is, the US, just like Russia, is a lot of population. People will download, but we had to be very patient. And the people that were patient and consistently put out episodes over time, it paid a lot of dividends in that they grew their audiences quite quickly. In this picture, in the early years, you'll see that lady. Her name is Jessica. She's one of the co-founders of She Podcasts. That is the largest female community of podcasters. Next to her is Liz Covart. She is one of the top historian podcasters. I would tell you that history podcasts, business podcasts, anything to do with meditation and health and wellness do extremely well. Of course, in the US, like I said, comedy podcasts always do well. People want to laugh. And there's a lot of different things that we notice do well. But as the ecosystem grows, it creates more opportunities. And another trend that we saw in the early podcasters is many of them, like there's right here, this is Katie Krimitsos in the middle. That's my wife. She started a podcast called Biz Women Rock, a podcast for women by business women. And what's interesting about that is 2 years ago, she pivoted and created a meditation podcast, Meditation for Women. The reason why I mentioned that is many of our podcasters, the original concept they started with might not be the concept they're doing today. So one of my slogans or catchphrases a lot of people will hear me say is start ugly. And start ugly, I wrote a book about this concept. You're better off starting ugly and figuring it out rather than waiting, because if you wait, you might miss some opportunities. And by starting ugly, you'll learn a lot. To give you an example of how hard it was to podcast in the early years, right now I'm podcasting using this mic. This is a Audio Technica AT2005. That's the model number. And it plugs right into my laptop. There was no such thing in the early years. You had to use XLR cables, which many musicians would be familiar with, but the general public wasn't. And there was a lot of technology hurdles that we had to go through. Whereas now the technology has flattened and it's getting even easier for people to get started when it comes to a podcast, as well as a lot of tools. There's a lot of tools and software that's out now that didn't exist when we all started. So that's a huge advantage for everybody, globally speaking. When we moved our conference to Orlando, the universe of podcasting expanded, but we also saw something else that everybody now is seeing globally. We saw a crossover of live streaming and video. And the reason is the technology started getting easier to use, and the audience was also getting more adjusted to using these new technologies. And since then, we've done a lot working with podcasters, helping them figure out how to live stream their podcast. But in the US, by and large, a podcast, if I say the word podcast, it's an audio recording that then goes on Apple and then gets aggregated on all the players out there. So I'm going to stop sharing. And what I want to share some thoughts. And I don't want to overwhelm anyone with information, but I do want to share with you kind of the growth curve I've seen people go through. One of the things that we teach globally is your podcast art, the actual cover art that people see, must grab people's attention almost immediately for them to click on what they're about to listen to. So in any language, many people tend to use a lot of words for their title, but you have to understand, if you're creating a podcast, if you could use 3 words or less to convey your message, you will get an audience much quicker. So let me explain what I mean by that. We have a lady that does Medicare. Medicare is our medical system, and people get that, their benefits that people, I think 65 or older get. That's her audience. She called her podcast Medicare Nation. Very easy to understand. My wife does meditations for women. Her podcast show is called Meditations for Women. So in the early days, it's easier for people to find you when they search these topics. For instance, if you're in the meditation niche, the number one word people are going to search in these players is meditation. If you're a history podcast, you should have history in your title. If you're a real estate podcast, so I think in all markets, most real estate investors do real estate for two reasons. They either want to flip and make money, or they want to cash flow. We found in the US market early on that anyone that had the term cash flow in their title worked really well. Now, you can have more words than 3 words. It's just if you could get the message down to 3 or less, it's very beneficial. And you have to have really dynamic cover art. Some people like a logo. Other people like their face on the cover art with their logo. If you're branding yourself and you want yourself to be a mini celebrity in your niche, I would recommend putting your face on your logo. And then you want to look at the categories of any player. Apple iTunes is kind of the biggest aggregator of podcasts. And I would look at the categories, and then you need to pick a category for your podcast to be listed in. One of the other ways you could get really great engagement is getting people to review your podcast and giving you honest reviews in iTunes, as well as reaching out to different players. So I don't know the Russian market, but I'm assuming there's a player that most people favor in the Russian marketplace. We've done this. You'd be really surprised how receptive the people at those software companies are when you email them directly and ask them if there's anything they could do to spotlight your podcast. Sometimes they'll pin it to the top for a couple of days, for a month. That'll allow you to grow your audience fairly quickly. In the US market, the majority of podcasts are weekly that are active. But one thing we've noticed is a lot of people tend to pod fade. And what that means is they start a podcast and then they stop. So even though we have over 1 million something podcasts listed, only a few 100,000 are active. So the market share opportunity is huge. Now let's talk about monetization. Everybody wants to know, how do I make money? And I'll share with you the growth trajectory that we saw. The early podcasters in the US were very afraid to make money. They felt that this was a pure platform, and are they allowed to make money? Should they make money? Is it right to make money? And the reason is podcast was a hobby platform, and a lot of people were doing it for fun, but it became a professionalized platform, and now it's people do it full time. They have teams. They might have assistants helping them now. So there's many ways to make money, but I'll cover 3 major ways. One way, if your podcast is very popular, let's say you have a very popular comedy podcast and thousands upon thousands of people listen to every episode. Just like a radio show, you can get an advertiser that pays you for an ad at the front of your podcast, or in the middle of your podcast, or at the end of your podcast. And those are all called different things. An ad before the show starts is a pre-roll. An ad in the middle is called a mid-roll. An ad at the end is called a post-roll. And the most popular ads that we've seen, especially when you're starting out, are host-read ads, which basically means you read the ad. And they go anywhere for $15 per thousand to $35 per thousand. Meaning, if you have 10,000 people listening to your podcast episode, someone could pay you about $20, let's just say, to use round numbers. That would be $200 an episode. Agencies usually represent the creators. So they take, in the US anyways, they take 30% of that. Might sound high, but it really isn't. They do quite a bit of work for you. They make sure that the billing, they make sure you get paid. So if the agency is doing their job, they're well worth that commission. So that's one way, and that's more of the traditional model that, works on radio and different platforms. Another way is you might have a very small audience, but your audience is a business-to-business audience, or you're talking about some kind of engineering or some kind of very unique thing that's very niche, and it's a very small audience. You could use that to further your career. If you're an entrepreneur, business consultant, or you're working in a company, you could use that to build your contact sphere and to be a key person of influence. So that's to get ahead in your business endeavors. You could also sell advertisement, but you don't sell it off of the per thousand model because you'll never get there. Usually those shows have 100 people, maybe 200 people, but they're highly influential. And those ad spots go for a premium, and it all depends on the niche. So we have seen people sell those spots for as much as $1,000 to $1,500 per episode because of the amount of money that's being transacted in that industry. So it goes in accordance with the value of the transactions in that industry. And then you have people that are entrepreneurs and they're consultants and they want to support one another. And those individuals use the podcast as a lead gen for people to learn about who they are, what they do, to do business with them. And usually at the end of the podcast, there's a call to action of how you could do business with each other. And, transact with one another. You could ask for emails, you could ask for different things. So the interesting thing is I've seen this community evolve. It's not only here to stay, it's the future. And I have seen the Russian market, the Eastern European market is, so the way globally it works is the US is the leader when it comes to podcasts because we were the first to really not only create it, but the ecosystem gathered a lot of momentum here. Right now, and then you have Australia, the UK, Spain, Germany. There's a few, Canada, that are very, you'll see it in the stats because these countries come up for English speaking anyways. I believe there's a huge opportunity in Russia, Eastern Europe, and I believe the people that are at this conference will be the leaders a few years from now that will be leading the charge. We do virtual conferences as well with PodFest. So if there's any way I could support you, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is chris@podfestexpo.com. If anyone wants to, just put it out there. If there's any way I could help, please let me know. But what I do know is some of the largest shows have yet to be born. And in the Russian marketplace, not only are you guys about to explode in your numbers, you're about to reach entire new marketplaces that people don't even know exist. And then the last thing I would say is there's podcasts that are based on fan bases. So you might have a podcast that's based on a fan base, like Elon Musk fan base or a Tesla fan base or a popular show that you like, and you get the fans after to talk about the show. There's so many, I'll leave you with the definition of podcasting, and it's my definition. It's on-demand, searchable audio, episodically delivered through the internet. So I'm going to say again, it's on-demand, searchable audio, episodically delivered through the internet. So what does that mean? Well, it's on demand. It means I can find it whenever I want, so I don't have to wait for it. 2, it's searchable. That's a game changer. That means I search with words and I find what I want. So please understand your words matter. Please make them searchable in that they match what people are searching for. There's a little bit of a guessing game there, but you could go into iTunes if you have iTunes or whatever your player is in your part and search what you already see. And then episodic, meaning you deliver episodes either on a weekly, monthly, daily basis, whatever it is for your audience. The format is audio and video now. A lot of podcasts are also delivered with video. When I first started, pretty much 99% of podcasts were audio only. And then the other thing I would tell you is it's not an interview show. A lot of people think of a podcast as an interview show. There's podcasts that are storytelling. People literally will go and share stories, and that could be a podcast. There's podcasts that literally are Q&A. They answer questions that are commonly asked in an industry. So imagine if someone's a jeweler and they have a Q&A show where they literally answer questions that their customers ask them all day long. Or in real estate, you name the industry, it doesn't matter. There's interview shows, of course. There's comedy shows. There's shows with 3 or 4 people. It's just them talking. There's all kinds of formats you could play with. So the opportunity is make sure you have really great keywords. Make sure you have a great cover art. Make sure you have really good audio. And then make sure you're delivering on the brand promise that the person showed up at your door for. So what I mean by that, and this is my closing thing, if I were to ask someone that listens to your show, I would ask them, why do you listen to this show and what do you get out of it? And they would say, I listen to the show because I always learn something new about computers, or I listen to the show because I never know what they're going to say. They're so funny. If someone says, I listen to the show and I still don't know why I listen to it, I don't know what it represents, you're going to lose that listener. So you want to deliver on your brand promise. For instance, my wife, her women's meditation show, she has a sleep show. People listen to that show to sleep. So if the feedback is, I can't even get through a whole episode because I fall asleep, for that show, that's good feedback. We want them to fall asleep before they get to the end of the show. And I have a friend that has a show called What Was That Like? And that's where he finds people in really crazy situations. And he asks them, what was that like? And he wants people to say, wow, that was crazy. I can't believe, that was a crazy story. So what was that like? So he actually named his show what he wants people to ask as they're listening to the show. So I think he had once a person that got shot 8 times and survived. He had another person that, smuggled drugs into the country, but the drugs opened up because they swallowed them and they were woke up in a coma, chained to a hospital bed. So these really extreme stories. And he asked them, what was that like? So, and that's a very popular podcast, by the way. And it just got started a couple years ago. For that, I want to thank you for your time and your presence. I love the fact that I was able to get up early because I'm a night owl to be here with you. I think that our ecosystem is going to bring so many amazing people together globally, and it's going to bridge us all together as one human race, helping support one another. So I wish you the greatest of luck with your shows, and I really look forward to the content creators on this call changing the world that we live in by putting out an amazing show out there into the world and having an audience find your voice. So I want to thank you, Anton and Greg. I truly appreciate you guys for having me. So we'll move to Q&A once you guys are ready. I hope you guys like my lighting, by the way.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, Anton.
Hear me? Yeah, thank you for such an incredible presentation. That was awesome. Yeah, I truly love this.
Thank you.
It's incredible. It's incredible. Yeah. So we have a few questions to ask here, and let me read them. So the first question was like, what podcasts are considered to be popular in terms of downloads in the United States? Is it like more than 30Ks per episode or more than 50Ks? Could you give us some numbers?
So like I said, it really depends on how big the audience niche is. So it really varies. So if you're talking about a comedy podcast, if you talk to the biggest comedians in the world, they don't consider it popular. I don't agree with this number, but I'm going to tell you what they say. They wouldn't agree unless it hits 100,000 an episode. But I would say if you're hitting 5,000 episode, that's 5,000 people listening. That's a lot.
Yeah, of course.
In my world. But when you go to the top celebrities, they want to see minimum 100,000 an episode. And the reason is they get paid maybe $20 per CPM. So it turns out to about 2,000 an episode. So that in the US, make $150,000. It's a nice stream of income. As far as business podcasts, if you could hit 2,000 to 5,000 downloads an episode, you're doing really well. Yep. If you have a niche podcast, or what I mean by that, like I have a guy that talks about how to do business with the government, and he has 500 people. That's a huge niche because there's not a lot of people in that niche, if that makes sense. People that teach podcasting, we have podcasters that teach podcasting, like School of Podcasting. Those guys get anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 an episode, and that's a lot because there's not a lot of people. So I hope that helps. But I would just say if you have over 100, if you have over 50 or 100 people, that's 50 or 100 people more than you ever had listening to everything you're saying.
Yeah, that's true. So another question is, how did you manage to explain to general public what podcasts are and why should they listen to that?
So the first thing we would do is I would have a PowerPoint. Literally, I would start with the definition of podcasting, and then we would You know what I did eventually? I would just have them pull out their phones and ask them to download the app, because they always ask, how much does it cost? And they don't even understand it's free. So it's a barrier. So then I would have them pull out their phones, find their player, and I would ask them to then find a topic they like and subscribe to a show. If you could get them hooked onto a show they like, they'll adapt to podcasting. But literally having them download, they see right then and there what it is, because to explain, it could be difficult.
Okay, yeah, that's a manual routine. Okay, great. So I guess we'll have some questions to you through email, because there's a lot of them. And we should move on to the Chinese market. And thank you once again.
Thank you so much, Anton. Thank you, everybody. And Anton, if you could put the link out to the Messengers documentary, I'll email it to you. But it's a free movie that explains, and that's why we did it. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody. Good luck in Asia. Bye.